The government has been adamant about a 3-year salary freeze for public servants. Trade unions declared a salary dispute and warned of a nationwide strike. Now the government has backtracked, tabling a 1.5% once-off salary adjustment and a monthly cash bonus of 978. In a thoughtful piece in the Sunday Times today, Fifth School of Governance Associate Professor William Gumede writes that a wage freeze is not the answer to the problems facing the public service. He now joins me on the line. Prof, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, you've written that freezing the public service wage bill on its own will not slash the debt. Please expand on this sentiment for us.
Yes, no, thank you for having me. It is important, of course, that we reduce the public wage. And the public wage is now about 35% really of the total budget. So, you know, that really is an extraordinarily large figure. And one normally, even in the companies, one has to bring that down to something like, 25% or so. It is important that we, bring that wage down. It could be a freeze or it could be, 1.5%, whatever is politically possible. But I think the most important thing, more money is actually wasted outside the public wage. Just think of, almost every year, irregular expenditure is something like 80 billion to 100 billion. I mean, that is just much more. That's more than the savings the government wants to create in a year by freezing the wage. So if government frees the wage now, it calculates that it would benefit or it would save 88 billion a year over 3 years. And as I said, only one item, irregular and fruitless expenditure, is close to 100 billion every year. So clearly, it's not just about reducing the wages. We need to increase the performance and effectiveness of the public service as quickly as possible.
Yeah, let's expand on that. There are also concerns raised that this will also not boost the performance or increase value for money. But are these savings, and are you saying that they won't be realized in reducing the wage bill?
No, it won't be realized in reducing the wage bill. It will just be 80 billion rand savings. It will be cancelled out by the corruption and mismanagement and incompetence, and which you could see in irregular and fruitless expenditure every year. So immediately cancel out. So it won't be a waste. What we need to do really is, at the same time as we bring down the public service wage, we'll have to bring a package of other reforms. And one of the other reforms that we really need to do is to cut also the salaries or wages of the political public service. The political public service is, your parliamentarians, your local councillors, people in the legislatures. You do that, and you have to at the same time cut the cabinet and cut the sort of, political advisors, deputy ministers, and so on. So you have to do it all at the same time. So you can't just have a wage freeze for your normal public servants. You have to do it also for those sort of elected public servants and sort of the political public servants.
Now, in the same breath, you cite that instead these will almost certainly immediately be lost to irregular and fruitless spending, and also incompetence and corruption. Please explain this aspect further.
As I said, every year on irregular expenditure, we lose close to 100 billion. So if the savings is 88 billion on a wage freeze of savings of the public sector wage, you see it's already cancelled. Then we lost almost every year in public procurement. So we've got a public procurement budget every year of something like just over 600 billion. About 25% to 40% of that money is just gone. Corruption or mismanagement and whatever. So that again brings us, these are huge amounts of money. So if we do the wage freeze, we must also then cut the leakages to do with corruption and mismanagement. We really have to do that, and at the same time increase the efficiency of the public service.
There's also an interesting aspect that you raised, that ideologically insisting that the public service must deliver a service when it does not have the capacity to do so is equally wasteful. You use the example of this in government stubbornly insisting that the public sector alone should roll out COVID-19 vaccines when it clearly does not have the capacity to do so?
Absolutely. I mean, part of the public sector is actually a failed state. You know what I mean? A failed state, it cannot deliver. No matter what you do, you either have to cut it off or you have to change the personnel. So you can't deliver. Now, if we insist, and there's unfortunately a whole lot of people in government and also in the ANC who insist that a public service has to do the things. Now, let's just look, in the case of vaccines, I mean, the public service, if it doesn't have the capacity to roll out in the kind of time period that we need, needless lives lost, because there's no, I mean, government announced rollout would be sometime in February or sometime in March. We're sitting in May, which just means, people have died because they didn't get the vaccine. And secondly, other countries don't want people to come to South Africa, or they don't want to take South Africans because they say, well, you are not vaccinated. So we're losing, whether it's tourism, whether it's business, we're losing investment. So that in itself is costly. So if we have a private sector and, that it has the capacity and the public sector can't do it, then we have to use the private sector. I mean, it's illogical, it's common sense. Yeah. But because we're so ideological about a public service that doesn't work, we lose even more money in that process.
I want us to backtrack a bit. In the 2019-2020 financial year, the government spent 623.8 billion rand on public servants' wages, which accounted for some 34% of the total government spending. Now, this is a massive amount, and clearly it is unsustainable, wouldn't you agree?
No, absolutely unsustainable. So we've got about 1.2 million public servants. So, that compares okay with other public services of other emerging markets, our competitors. But the problem with our public service is it doesn't perform. Compared to our peers, it really performs something like 10 to 20% compared to our peers. But we get more money also. That's the second problem. So other public servants or public services get less money per employee, but we get more money per employee. What we do, we deliver worse per employee.
Now, you say that the ineffective public service is now on its own an obstacle to economic growth and new investment, and a cause of the migration of skills and capital as well as investment. What impact does this have on our local economy?
A lot of people who, we need jobs in this country. We need foreign investors. We need local investors. A lot of, potential local investors, they say the public service is so ineffective. Just a practical example, you want to get a passport renewed, or you want a car driver's license renewed. I mean, you can spend weeks or months in some parts of the country. You want to bring in a CEO, say from abroad, you can't. Because the public service is so ineffective. So then, a lot of investors then decide, local and international ones, well, let's go to other places where it's much easier. We don't have the red tape, we don't have the corruption, we don't need to bribe anyone, and things just work smoothly. So the ineffective public service now is actually a drain on growth in South Africa. It's a drain on employment creation, and it's also a drain on development. It is actually an obstacle to development.
But the big question is how? How can we reach this shift?
The very, very first thing that we need to do is to hold people accountable for delivery, for corruption, for waste and mismanagement. So once we do that, we will see the start of a turnaround. Now, right now, people can behave with impunity.
Right.
What we need to do, we need to tackle corruption also, because corruption is different from mismanagement and incompetence. So we have to hold people accountable. And then thirdly, we'll have to get merit-based appointments, to the public service. Get the right people with the skill set, whether you don't like it, whether they're not members, whether they're white, whether they're any other color, we get them in there in order to deliver.
And as we wrap up, poor service delivery is also one reason that South Africa is deindustrializing, losing capacity in the manufacturing as well as the technology and heavy industry space. The fall in public service is also a source of political instability, which is seen in violent public service protests. Just expand to us on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, we've seen a rise in, violent public service protests in the country where people protest against poor service delivery and so on. And one of the reasons really is because of, the public service is not delivering for people. Potholes, see potholes, nobody's doing anything about it, from a housing point of view, electricity, people don't get a delivery, security, the police is ineffective. Now we see mob justice. I mean, there's a couple of incidents last week. There is the failure of the public service. You go to a hospital, some people joke, you go to a public hospital to die. Our public education system, I mean, we see it every year. It is very poor. It delivers people who are actually uneducated, not ready for the market economy. So that means that it causes instability of the country also. Instability of the country is that people who don't get the delivery that they expect protest violently. They burn down libraries, they burn down municipal buildings, and others who start joining radical political parties, populist parties, because the public service is not delivering for them.
That's Professor William Gumede, who's written that a wage freeze is not the answer to the problems facing the public service.